Good morning and welcome to this Sunday's edition of Black Almanac. This morning we look to carry on the torch, continuing to honor a soldier who has been representing those who are not represented for decades. He shaped not only the community of Newtown, but the city of Sarasota. And though Dr. Ed James II is not with us in body, he is with us in spirit.
Good morning. I'm Ed James and this is Black Almanac. Florida Governor Rick Scott recently reassigned 22 first-degree murder cases from the 9th Judicial Circuit State Attorney Amaryllis Ayala to the 5th Judicial State's Attorney Brad King. According to Scott, he made the assignments in the interest of justice. Ms. Ayala, the state's first black elected prosecutor, said, removing a prosecutor because of a disagreement over her use of discretion was unprecedented and overreach. Mrs. Ayala is adamant that the moratorium on the death penalty was not based on emotion, but rather on research that shows that states with capital punishment are no safer than states without it. Ed Brodsky, state's attorney for Florida's 12th Judicial Circuit, comprising Sarasota, Manatee, and DeSoto counties, joins us with his insight and analysis. Well, sir, thank you again for stopping by and bringing us some insight into what's going on.
Pleasure to be here, Dr. James.
I'm concerned that I'm trying to understand something. The state attorney in what is Orange, Osceola in 9th Circuit has decided that she, a newly elected state attorney, will not seek the death penalty in any capital cases. And the governor has said that in the interest of justice, he believes that the cases should be taken from her, and he has already assigned 52 cases, reassigned 52 cases. Florida legislature was talking about taking some of her money, but it appears that the state attorney has absolute discretion. Who to prosecute, what to prosecute, and how to prosecute. Sure. What say you?
Well, it's a very interesting issue, and certainly I can tell you since Ramos Ayala was sworn into office this past January as the newly elected state attorney, I think that no one knew her position on the death penalty. I understand that according to her that she'd never been asked while she was out there on the campaign trail about the death penalty.
And she never volunteered.
And it never volunteered. So I think that you know, people didn't really know, but I think people probably expected that as her role as the elected state attorney leading Orange and Osceola counties, that she would seek the death penalty in appropriate cases, and I think so people were surprised, and not only in her community but here at home, here in our community here, and throughout the state, and I think it's made ripples throughout the nation with her decision. You know, it is a law on the books in Florida. The Florida legislature has certainly passed laws, and recently the governor signed a new law into law this past March, and the death penalty is on the books in Florida. And she has said in a press conference that she won't enforce that law.
Period.
Period.
In any case.
And she's backpedaled a little bit. I've read a pleading. You know, currently she has filed an action in the Middle District Court and the federal court, and she has filed an action with the Florida Supreme Court, trying to prevent the governor from what he has done to take these cases away from her. And in those documents, she suggests that she did not say that she would not seek the death penalty when appropriate. So I think that will be for debate as to whether she said that or not. But you cite the authority that the governor cited, this Florida statute under Chapter 27, giving the governor the authority where it's in the best interest of justice that he make an assignment, and that's what the governor did.
So they both did what they thought in their opinion, was correct, based upon their interpretation of the law.
And I will certainly say that I believe that Aramis Ayala believes that it's within her realm of the law to say that she will not enforce the death penalty. The problem is that she's a constitutional officer elected to uphold the Constitution and to follow the law. And by failing to uphold the death penalty statute, which is in law, and whether she likes it or not, the death penalty is on the books in the state of Florida, she fails as a constitutional officer to enforce that law. And we have, and she will have, and she has now in her jurisdiction, some very serious cases that have come before her, some very serious murder cases. Markeith Lloyd comes to mind, certainly, as that was the case that unfortunately for her, she went on stage.
That was the first case.
But could she have come out on a
elected.
bigger case? I mean, she came out on the grandmother of them all, the whopper of them all, Markeith Lloyd killing his ex-girlfriend who was pregnant at the time, and then when this Orlando officer tried to arrest him, he shot her, numerous times.
Not only was it law enforcement, I'm not belittling.
It's ironic, right, that
Yeah.
she would, when there's a law enforcement officer killed.
Yeah, that she would have that particular case, but then this was a black
Black female
female
officer.
who had a very, very great reputation in the community.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and maybe, just maybe, if she hadn't been the officer, as kind as she was, she may have approached Lloyd, the killer, a little differently.
And I'll be honest, I don't think race had anything to do with it.
No, I'm
I know
saying
you're
it's not.
Right. And I just think that unfortunately, this was a case that I think that the folks that live in Orange and Osceola County, and I think throughout Florida, and I think certainly from the reaction that we've seen from the governor, General Pambondi, and our legislature, both in the House and the Senate, we've seen some strong reaction. I think people, frankly, were shocked. And I can tell you that she's one of the 20 elected state attorneys. There's 20 elected state attorneys throughout the state of Florida. I'm honored to be the state attorney here in the 12th Circuit, serving Manatee, Sarasota, and DeSoto counties. But the other 19 state attorneys, after Ms. Ayala came forward and said that she would not seek the death penalty in any case, we wanted the community to know that she stood alone in that decision. So the other 19 state attorneys released statements saying that we don't stand with her position, we don't align with her position, and that while we understand that the death penalty should be sought in only those rare cases, that it's not every, we want to make sure that we're very careful in those cases that we identify for, identifying and seeking the death penalty, the imposition of the death penalty. We know that it's a very serious consequence, but that we are committed to properly evaluating those cases and deciding when it's appropriate to seek the death penalty.
Across America, there are only two other prosecuting attorneys, or state attorneys, who have that same philosophy.
Right. It's very rare to find that philosophy and be the elected district attorney or the state attorney.
And it's interesting that one of the others is female. And out in the Midwest, I can't remember just where it is. But there are those who would say hers was an emotional reaction, meaning Ms. Ayala. And she is taking that as a part of her defense. It's not emotional. Now, I have not read, and I've done a lot of research or seen anything where anyone else said that's an emotional female reaction.
Right.
But she is using that as a part of her defense. The groups who you normally hear from who are anti-death penalty are supporting her. And then the other folk who talk about justice and justice are supporting the governor in this case. And I remember the job is to ensure justice. In this case, you're saying it's on the Florida book. We've had some issues with it, but it's on the books. And so...
Right, it's on the books, and I think that we would be in a different posture. I think we would be in a different place if the state attorney there, Ms. Ayala, had said that I may not be inclined to pursue it unless it's the appropriate case, but that we will continue to look at the appropriate cases and decide case by case in those cases where it's appropriate. And unfortunately, she put her blinders on, shirked her responsibility as a state attorney, and said that she, off the top, and said, we will never, ever, under any circumstance. And I can give you lots of circumstances where if she said that, you'd be outraged.
Well, in this case, most of like we said, of America is outraged who's heard about this case. What does this kind of, I'm looking for the right word, runaway comes to mind, but what does this kind of case do for law enforcement on all ends in terms of prosecutors, jurists, and whatever?
Well, it's like you said. I think that that the death penalty will always be debated. I think that there will always be those folks that are strongly opposed to the death penalty, and I think that there's going to be folks that will always believe that there is a value in the death penalty, and I think that that will continue in the future. That's always going to happen. She's certainly raised the debate. She's brought that debate to the forefront of everyone's attention, but at the same time, I think that within her own community and the people that she serves and the law enforcement agencies that she has to work with, I think she's probably harmed their trust in her because they've been very critical of
poison the well.
I'm sorry?
Poison the well.
Yes, sir.
Do you think that as we go forward across our state, future elections, based upon this instance, do you think one of the questions that will be asked?
I think so. Yeah. Absolutely. You're right.
For an example, at Tiger Bay, or the Tiger Bay is across Florida, because we have them. Probably one of the first questions they're going to ask, if elected, how do you feel about the death penalty? Sure.
And is there any law that you'd like to share with us right now that you're going to ignore, that you feel that you're not going to enforce? Because it could be drug trafficking laws, it could be prostitution laws, whatever the laws are. There could be something where tomorrow someone could say, I'm making a decision that we're no longer going to enforce that law. And unfortunately, the voters, and Jeff Ashton, who was the incumbent state attorney who lost that race, I'm sure he wishes that the community and the public had known that before the election.
How does this affect the governor in the law enforcement community?
Well, luckily in the other 19 circuits, I think we're fine. I mean, because all of us have expressed our support of the governor and his position. In fact, in these legal actions that have been filed, I expect that prosecutors will be coming forward to say that we support the actions of the governor, and we think that the governor's actions were warranted. It was a warranted response to what occurred. She will have to restore relationships, build trust again, and show that she will seek justice. And I think, and right now, I think that bridge has been broken a little bit in Orange and Osceola County. But at the end of the day, depending on the governor, still is, from what I understand, reviewing his actions, what actions, legal actions he can take, and what actions he decides are appropriate, and whether he'll take further action, we don't know. And certainly we'll have to await to see what the federal court chooses to do and what the Florida Supreme Court chooses to see how they decide this issue.
Funding for all state attorneys' offices across, as is with public defenders' offices, is determined by the Florida legislature. Initially, some folk and organizations were so upset that they said take her funding away. And there was discussion about doing that, and the governor had said at one point that he was considering it. The House and the Senate, Florida, were considering it. And then they changed a little bit. Said, let's take away X number of dollars and distribute among those state attorney's officers who have to prosecute the cases. What does it mean if say, you were selected to prosecute a case from that county? Would the juries be picked locally?
No. Actually, and that's why it's a significant resource to, for example, Mark Keith Lloyd, and then there were 21 cases that subsequently were assigned to the Fifth Circuit, to the state attorney there in the Fifth Circuit in Marion County, Ocala area, to Brad King. And Brad King felt that between himself and some of his attorneys on his staff that they were capable and ready to handle that workload. And I heard Senator Latvala yesterday. The Senate and the House are in budget discussions right now. In fact, I listened to their discussions about the Ninth Circuit and what was going to happen there. Originally, they were talking about taking 21 positions away from her and about $1.3 million out of her budget. These were dollars that were given to her last year, last session, and when they were trying to create a human trafficking task force over there with some domestic violence. And so the Senate is now, it appears to be, from what I heard yesterday, in a position to perhaps cut half of that.
Yeah, they have reached a compromise.
They've reached a compromise, but my understanding, from what I understood yesterday, the House isn't interested in a compromise. They want to take the entire thing. But I think that today the House and the Senate are in budget conference talks, and I expect that they hopefully will have some resolution of that issue. But I expect that no matter what, at a minimum, based on the Senate discussions, that they're looking at least $500,000 and a significant number of positions being taken away from the Ninth Circuit state attorney. But as Senator Latvala said yesterday, and I agree with him, this is not about a punitive measure or punishment. This is about reallocating resources where they're needed. And when 21
to support the workload.
Sure, when 21 cases have been moved from Orange and Osceola County over to Brad King's circuit over in the Fifth Circuit, Marion County, he needs help. That's 21 death penalty cases, which require highly experienced, highly skilled prosecutors, and it requires lots of manpower, lots of communication and partnership with law enforcement, lots of resources, lots of investigation, lots of man hours, lots of dollars. And so it's only appropriate that whichever state attorney accepts those assignments, is able to take those cases, that additional burden, that they be helped financially so that they can support the manpower and the resources to enable to do that job.
I would think, in addition to the prosecutors who would be assigned to this, you have office staff and support staff that they need also.
Absolutely.
It's bigger than one hired gun coming in and...
Oh, we're nobody, you know, at my office, you know, we say the troops and the people that help us and that help us do our work is our staff. And you're right, without them, we can't go over to the courthouse and do our job.
What about, since those cases occurred in that circuit, would they, you believe, stay in that circuit?
Yes.
And the attorney and the staff would go there?
Which is the additional resource. I mean, because these are folks that don't live in Orange County. They don't work in Orange County. They don't have a home there. They would have to travel there, and everyone has to live out of a hotel and make accommodations and do everything they can, which is obviously another additional expense for those attorneys. And it's very inconvenient, you know, as opposed to traveling to your home office and where you live. So yes, they would have to travel to the Ninth Circuit to hear those cases.
From where you sit, do you believe that there will be, at the legislative level, something coming up anytime in the near future to talk about cases like this so that you won't have this again, that possible if a state attorney makes a declaration that they will not do X, Y, Z, then that's tantamount to saying you don't want this job and they can't run.
I could certainly foresee that. I think if the Florida Supreme Court resolves this in favor of the governor, then I think the issue's been answered. It's been solved, and the governor will know that he has the full authority to make these decisions when he thinks they're appropriate in the best interest of justice, as he's declared, and likewise with the federal court. So I think that will be telling. I understand that in a few weeks the governor has been asked to reply to the petitions that have been filed by Miss Ayala, because her petition was against the governor and it was against Brad King, the state attorney from the Fifth Circuit that took those cases.
Took the cases.
So I think we may have some resolution when the courts decide this issue.
And it's interesting. So then are we going to have to go civil to decide criminal?
Absolutely.
And otherwise they are normally separated.
Right.
What would you say for people who have been following this and maybe watching this program? We're going to wrap this up. What would you say to them?
I would say to them that we understand that not everyone supports the death penalty, and we understand that, and that this is going to be one of those issues that are going to be hotly debated. And certainly the actions that Ms. Ayala took are based on her personal beliefs, and she carefully examined them, and she honestly believes, I feel that she's doing the right thing. But here at home, I took an oath as a constitutional officer, as the elected state attorney. I believe that in those appropriate cases that we should seek the death penalty. We're going to do it carefully. We're not going to be, it's not going to be a fast, easy decision. We're going to take our time. We're going to make sure that we do the right thing and that justice is served. So we want folks to know here in our local community here in Sarasota, Manatee, DeSoto County, that if someone does something, commits a capital felony offense, and they warrant it, we will seek the ultimate sanction, which would be the death penalty. I think it's my constitutional oath. I think it's my obligation. I think it's our responsibility, and I think it does serve justice to do that.
Well, thank you so much for stopping by and sharing with our community.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
We'll be talking with you again soon, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
This month, we commemorate the 50th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s earth-shattering statements opposing the war in Vietnam. He called his remarks of April 4th, 1967, Beyond Vietnam, Time to Break the Silence. King's most radical and challenging speech was delivered exactly 1 year to the day before he was assassinated. Now, 50 years after King delivered what was essentially an indictment of America's prosecution of the war in Vietnam, his radical words then are no less true about modern-day America. He noted the country's aggressive military actions, its irresponsible spending, its misplaced priorities, and its essential hypocrisy. In his 1967 speech at Riverside Church in New York City in front of 3,000, King clearly departed from the uplifting tone of his iconic 1963 I Have a Dream speech, in which he dreamed of a better, more racially harmonious America. His point of view sharpened as he looked right into the face of America, seeing its uglier continents. America needs radical change, he said, not mere reform, not gentle tweaking, not tiny steps, but leaps of change. It is time to end the violence of war and the violence of poverty. Mahatma Gandhi once said, poverty is the worst form of violence. The war on poverty was launched by President Lyndon B. Johnson in his January 1964 State of the Union address. In the more than 50 years since the campaign was announced, Head Start, legal aid, Medicare, Medicaid, and food nutrition programs have been lifesavers for the poor. Soon after Johnson launched his war on poverty, he escalated U.S. involvement in the war in Vietnam. The nation's time, attention, and treasure were shifted from fighting poverty at home to fighting the Viet Cong overseas. King understood the shift. He realized poverty was losing the nation's attention, therefore hurting for most of us, essentially in the inner cities, even as the war in Vietnam was killing and maiming American and Vietnamese citizens disproportionately. After those from the inner cities and against Asian villages, his increasing awareness of that triple whammy of death, injury, and mass poverty seems to have seen the biggest influence on King to speak out. He saw the racist nature of the war. He would be greatly saddened to see open racism is reoccurring in America today. Dr. King said the triple threats of American life are racism, militarism, and poverty. After fighting for years for voting rights for tax-paying American citizens of color, after touring southern towns and northern cities and seeing hunger, poverty, and dilapidation staring him in the face, and after seeing the impact of the Vietnam War on returning Vietnam veterans and their families, King was moved to speak out. King called for a true revolution of values. His revolution of values would cause us to question the policies and practices of the past. His revolution will cause us to take a hard look at the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth. His revolution of values will call for the elimination of war as a way of settling differences. King says simply, war is not the answer. He called for a vastly different way of looking at it and settling things. King made the connection that a nation that continues year in and year out to spend more and more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. King's comments in his searing April 4, 1967 speech are just as relevant today as they were then. Our spending priorities are still askew, and we are perhaps getting more inclined to approve increased defense spending. And we still have much racism to eliminate against African Americans, Jews, Muslims, and Hispanics. The parallels to then and now are quite striking. As the U.S. patronizes defense spending, increasing it at the expense of domestic spending, now more than ever, we need Martin Luther King's voice, its moral tone, its clear direction, and its challenging purpose. We must be bold if we want things to be better. We will not be able to become Dr. King. We all must become Dr. King. For Black Almanac, I'm Ed James, and that's my final word. Have a blessed Easter, Suncoast.
You're special. Yes, you are special. Ladies, mothers, it's that time of year again. Time for the pre-Mother's Day brunch.
May 13th at 10 a.m. at the Fat Ballroom located in Lakewood Ranch at the Polo Grill.
Honoring mothers, past and present.
Come one, come all.
When money's tight and emergencies arise, CashNetUSA.com is available 24/7 to deliver quick loans for approved customers when they need it the most.
Apply now at CashNetUSA.com.
Money's on the way with CashNet USA.
My goal every day when I come into work at ABC7 is to tell your stories, give you that major local news and those details that you really care about. I'm Jacqueline Matter, and I'm here for you.
ABC 7 News at 7 weeknights.